Nolan leaned against the doorframe, checking his Rolex with a bored sigh while his mother fought for every shallow breath in the hospital bed behind him. He looked at me with that practiced, pitying smile, the one he used right before destroying someone, and told me I was doing a great job. He had no idea that 10 minutes ago, the comatose woman behind him had opened her eyes, grabbed my wrist, and whispered the secret that was about to turn his inheritance into a prison sentence. If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. The driveway of the Hawthorne estate was long enough to land a small aircraft, and right now it felt like a runway, launching the only protection I had out into the world, leaving me behind. I stood on the porch, wrapping my cardigan tighter around my chest, not because of the wind, but because of the sudden, hollow feeling in my stomach. Nolan was loading the last of the leather suitcases into the trunk of the black SUV. He moved with that casual, athletic grace that had charmed me 3 years ago, the kind of movement that suggested the world would always get out of his way. I watched him slam the trunk shut. The sound echoed off the stone facade of the house like a gunshot. I wanted to ask him to stay. The words were right there, sitting on the back of my tongue, tasting like copper. I wanted to say that I was terrified of being alone in this mausoleum of a house with his dying mother. I wanted to say that Dr. Whitmore's instructions were too complicated, that the silence in the hallways was too loud, that I was just a kindergarten teacher, not a hospice nurse. But I didn't say any of that. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. If I complained, I would be the nagging wife. If I showed fear, I would be the outsider who couldn't handle the Hawthorne resilience. Nolan turned to me, smoothing the lapels of his charcoal suit. He walked up the steps, and for a second, I thought he was going to hug me for real. I thought he might pull me in and tell me he would be back in a day, that the real estate conference in Chicago didn't matter as much as I did. Instead, he placed a hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm, possessive, but lacking any actual warmth. It felt like a coach steadying a player before a game they were expected to lose. He told me that I was an angel for doing this. He said that with the nurse quitting so suddenly, I was the only one they could trust. The way he said the word trust made my skin prickle. It sounded heavy, like a burden rather than a compliment. I forced a smile, the kind I used during parent-teacher conferences when a parent was screaming at me about their child's grades. I told him not to worry. I told him to have a safe flight. I lied through my teeth because that was what this marriage had become. A series of small, polite lies to keep the peace. Gavin, the oldest brother, didn't even pretend to be nice. He was already in the passenger seat tapping furiously on his phone. He didn't look up. He didn't wave. To Gavin, I was just part of the furniture, something decorative and functional that occasionally needed maintenance. Leo, the youngest, offered me a sheepish wave from the back seat, but he looked pale, almost sick. I wondered if he was hungover again, or if the stress of his mother's accident was finally cracking that party boy veneer. Nolan kissed my forehead. His lips were dry. He told me that Dr. Whitmore would be checking in daily and that I had the emergency numbers on the fridge. He said they would be back on Friday. Friday. That was 5 days away. 5 days of silence. 5 days of feeding tubes and bedpans and the terrifying sound of a ventilator hissing in the guest room. I nodded. I told him I loved him. I waited for him to say it back. He smiled, patted my cheek, and turned away. He walked to the car, got in, and didn't look back. As the engine roared to life, a deep, guttural purr that vibrated in my chest, I realized I was holding my breath. I watched the taillights recede down the tree-lined driveway, getting smaller and smaller until they were just 2 red eyes winking out in the distance. They were gone. I was alone. The silence didn't fall. It rushed in to fill the vacuum the car had left. It was a physical thing, heavy and suffocating. I turned back to the front door, the massive oak slabs looming over me like the gates to a fortress. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The foyer was cold. It was always cold. The Hawthorne estate was built to impress, not to comfort. The marble floors clicked sharply under my flats as I walked toward the staircase. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked up. The banisters spiraled upward into the gloom of the second floor. Somewhere up there, a machine was beeping. Beep, beep, beep. It was faint, rhythmic, like a countdown. I put my hand on the polished wood of the railing. My palm left a smudge. I stared at it. I was the lady of the house, technically, but I still felt like a visitor who had overstayed her welcome. I thought about calling my mom. I wanted to hear her voice, wanted her to tell me to pack a bag and come home to her cramped, warm apartment where the radiator clanked and the smell of garlic and onions always hung in the air. But I couldn't. Nolan had made it very clear that we needed to keep Cecilia's condition private. He had talked about stock prices and board confidence and media scrutiny. He had made me feel like calling my mother would be an act of corporate sabotage, so I didn't reach for my phone. Instead, I walked to the kitchen. I needed water. My throat felt like it was coated in dust. The kitchen was spotless, sterile stainless steel and black granite. On the counter sat the schedule Dr. Whitmore had left. It wasn't just a note, it was a manifesto. I picked it up. The paper was thick, expensive stock. His handwriting was precise, jagged, almost aggressive. I read the first line again. It demanded that the midday sedative be administered at exactly noon, not 5 minutes past. Noon. I looked at the microwave clock. It was 11:45. I had 15 minutes before I had to go back into that room. 15 minutes to pretend I was a normal woman in a normal house and not a jailer for a ghost. I poured a glass of tap water and drank it standing up, leaning against the sink. I looked out the window at the sprawling backyard. The grass was manicured to within an inch of its life. The hedges were perfect geometric shapes. Everything here was controlled. Everything except the accident. I replayed the story Nolan had told me. The slick road, the tree, the lack of skid marks. The police said she must have fallen asleep at the wheel. Cecilia Hawthorne, the Iron Lady of real estate, falling asleep while driving? It didn't fit. She was a woman who drank espresso at 10 at night and read contracts until dawn. She didn't sleep. She waited. My stomach twisted again. I put the glass down. It clinked too loudly against the granite. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching me. I knew it was ridiculous. It was just an old house with settling bones and drafty windows. But the portraits in the hallway seemed to track me. The mirrors seemed to hold my reflection a second too long. I rubbed my arms, trying to generate some friction, some heat. I checked the clock. 11:50, 10 minutes. I couldn't delay it. I had to go upstairs. I had to crush the pills. I had to check the IV. I had to look at her face. That face that used to look at me with such thinly veiled disdain, now slack and empty. I took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and forced my feet to move toward the stairs. The guest bedroom had been transformed into an ICU. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn, blocking out the daylight, leaving the room in a perpetual, amber-colored twilight, courtesy of the bedside lamps. The air smelled of antiseptic and lavender potpourri, a sickening combination that made my head swim. I walked to the small table set up beside the bed. It was covered in medical supplies, syringes, gauze, alcohol wipes, and the pill crusher that had become my nemesis. I hated the sound it made, that grinding, crunching noise as it pulverized the medicine into dust. It felt violent. I looked at the schedule again. Dr. Whitmore had been emphatic about the dosage. He had highlighted the section on the sedatives in yellow marker. He had written a note in the margin saying that consistency was the key to neural regeneration. I didn't know anything about neural regeneration. I taught 5-year-olds how to share crayons, but I knew how to follow instructions. I was a good girl. I was a rule follower. That was why Nolan liked me. I was safe. I was manageable. I picked up the orange prescription bottle. The label was typed in small sans serif font. It listed a chemical name I couldn't pronounce, something with a lot of Z's and X's. I shook 2 pills into my palm. They were blue, oval-shaped, innocuous-looking. I dropped them into the crusher. I twisted the lid. Crunch. I winced. I twisted it again. Grind. I poured the blue powder into a small cup of water and stirred it until it dissolved into a cloudy liquid. I drew it up into the large syringe. My hands were shaking. They always shook when I did this. I was terrified of getting an air bubble in the line, terrified of hurting her, terrified that she would wake up and scream at me for being clumsy. I moved to the side of the bed. Cecilia Hawthorne lay on her back, her arms resting on top of the silk duvet. She looked smaller than I remembered. Without her tailored suits, her heels, and her rigid posture, she was just a frail woman with graying hair fanned out against the pillow. Her chest rose and fell with a mechanical rhythm, aided by the oxygen cannula in her nose. I checked the feeding tube port. It looked clean. I wiped it with an alcohol swab anyway, just like Dr. Whitmore showed me. I felt like an imposter. I kept waiting for a real nurse to burst in and push me aside, to tell me I was doing it all wrong. But no one came. It was just me and the beeping monitor. I connected the syringe to the tube. I pushed the plunger slowly. 1001, 1002. Dr. Whitmore said to push slowly to avoid gastric distress. I watched the cloudy blue liquid disappear into the tube, flowing into her body. "I'm sorry, Cecilia," I whispered. I didn't know why I was apologizing. Maybe for the indignity of it all. Maybe because I was the one feeding her through a tube while her sons were flying first class to Chicago. I finished the injection and flushed the tube with clear water. I disconnected the syringe and set it aside. I checked her vitals on the monitor. Heart rate, 62. Oxygen saturation, 98. Blood pressure, 110/70. Stable. Always stable. She was a statue. I picked up a warm washcloth from the basin I had prepared earlier. Part of the routine was keeping her clean, wiping her face and hands. It felt intimate in a way that made me uncomfortable. We had never been close. She had tolerated me. At the wedding, she had told me I looked adequate. Now I was wiping the sleep from the corners of her eyes. I started with her forehead, moving the cloth gently over her skin. It was cool to the touch, papery. I moved down to her cheeks. I avoided the cannula. I wiped her chin. I was humming a song under my breath, something from the radio just to fill the silence. I leaned in close to wipe her neck. That was when the rhythm changed. It wasn't a sound. It was a shift in the air pressure. The mechanical rise and fall of her chest hitched. It stuttered. I froze. My hand was still hovering near her neck, the warm washcloth dripping slightly onto the pillowcase. I looked at the monitor. The green line traced a spike, then another. The steady beep, beep, beep sped up. Beep, beep, beep. "Cecilia?" I whispered. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stared at her face. Her eyelids fluttered. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through me. Dr. Whitmore had said involuntary muscle spasms were normal. He said not to overreact. He said the brainstem fires random signals as it heals. It's just a spasm, I told myself. It's just a spasm. I reached out to check her pulse, my fingers trembling as I sought the radial artery in her wrist. I looked down at her hand. Her fingers twitched. Then they curled. They weren't twitching randomly. They were closing. They were forming a fist. I gasped and took a step back, knocking into the side table. The pill crusher rattled against the glass surface. "Cecilia," I said again, louder this time. Her eyes snapped open. They didn't drift open lazily like someone waking from a nap. They flew open. 1 second, she was asleep. The next, she was staring at the ceiling with wide, terrified eyes. They were blue, piercingly blue, the same color as the pills I had just dissolved. She sucked in a breath, a harsh, rasping sound that tore through the room. She gagged on the air. "Oh my God," I cried out. Okay, it's okay. You're waking up. It's okay." I moved to reach for the call button on the bed rail. the one that rang nowhere because we were in a private home, not a hospital. My brain was misfiring. I needed to call 911. No, I needed to call Dr. Whitmore. I reached for my phone in my pocket. Before I could grab it, a hand shot out. It was fast. Impossibly fast for a woman who had been atrophying in a bed for 3 weeks. Her hand clamped around my wrist. Her fingers were bony, digging into my skin like talons. Her grip was iron. I screamed. It was a short, strangled sound. I tried to pull away, but she held on. She pulled me down. She was dragging me toward the bed. "Don't," she rasped. Her voice sounded like grinding stones. I stared at her. Her eyes had locked onto mine. There was no confusion in them. There was no post-coma fog. There was only clarity. Terrifying, absolute clarity. "Don't call him," she hissed. "Cecilia, you're awake," I stammered, my knees shaking so hard I thought I would collapse. "I have to call Dr. Whitmore. He needs to know—" "No." She squeezed my wrist harder, her fingernails breaking the skin. "Listen to me." I stopped pulling. I stopped breathing. I stared down at my mother-in-law, the woman who I thought was a vegetable, and saw a fire burning in her eyes that scared me more than her silence ever had. "They're going to kill you next," she whispered. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. "They're going to kill you next." I blinked, my brain refusing to process the syntax of the sentence. "What? Cecilia, you're confused. You've been in a coma. You're waking up. It's the medication. It's—" "I have not." She cut me off, her voice gaining a fraction more strength, though it was still dry and brittle. "Been in a coma, not for 4 days. I stared at her. 4 days? But I've been here. I've been feeding you. I've been giving you your meds. You haven't moved. You haven't blinked. Paralysis." She spat the word out. She released my wrist, her arm flopping back onto the bed as if the effort had cost her everything. She lay there, panting, her chest heaving. "I could hear you. I could feel you, but I couldn't move. The drug wears off, and right before the next dose, I had to wait." I looked at the syringe on the table, the empty syringe, the blue liquid. "Wait," I said, a cold dread seeping into my marrow. "The medicine. I just gave it to you. If you're awake, I need to—" "It's not medicine, you stupid girl," Cecilia snapped. The insult was comforting, strangely. It sounded like her. "It's a sedative, a paralytic cocktail, mixed with something else." She turned her head to look at me, and the pity in her eyes was worse than her anger. "They aren't waiting for me to recover, Audrey. They are waiting for me to die, and they are using you to do it." I took a step back, shaking my head. No, that's insane. Nolan loves you. He's been worried sick. He hired Dr. Whitmore. He spent thousands setting up this room." "Whitmore is a gambler," Cecilia said. "He owes money to people who break legs for a living. Gavin bought his debt 6 months ago." "Gavin?" I said his name like a question. "Gavin found out," she whispered, "about the will, about the audit." "What audit?" "The trust fund," she said, closing her eyes for a moment as a wave of exhaustion hit her. "I ordered an audit 3 weeks ago. I found the transfers. Millions, Audrey. $7 million siphoned out over 5 years. My hand flew to my mouth. $7 million. "They thought I was old," she continued, opening her eyes again. "They thought I was slipping. Just a rich widow signing checks. But I saw it. I called a meeting. In the library. I told them I was going to the district attorney." "You told Nolan?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Did Nolan know?" Cecilia looked at me, and her expression softened, just a fraction. "Who do you think drove the getaway car, Audrey? Who do you think distracted the bank manager while Gavin forged the authorizations?" I felt the room spin. I grabbed the edge of the dresser to steady myself. Nolan. My Nolan. The man who brought me tea in bed. The man who cried at the end of Marley and Me. He didn't know, I said weaky. He couldn't. He knew, she said firmly. He was there. He stood right there in the library and told me I was being hysterical. He told me I needed to rest. And then, 2 hours later, I was driving down Route 7 and my brake pedal went all the way to the floor. The police said it was an accident, I argued, clinging to the official narrative like a lifeline. They said you swerved. They said there were no skid marks because you fell asleep. There were no skid marks because the brakes didn't work, Cecilia nearly shouted, but her voice cracked into a cough. She hacked violently for a moment, her face turning red. I instinctively reached for the water cup, but she slapped my hand away. "Don't give me that," she wheezed. "That's the poison." I looked at the cup. The residue of the blue powder was still visible on the rim. "Dr. Whitmore calls it a neurosuppressant," she said, regaining her breath. "He told me it was to reduce brain swelling. That was before I knew. Before I woke up in the hospital and heard them talking in the hallway. I heard Gavin tell Whitmore to finish it at home. He said the hospital was too public, too many nurses asking questions." She pointed a shaking finger at the IV bag hanging on the metal stand. "That bag," she said. "Change it. Now." "What? Change the bag. Whatever is in there, it's the long game. It weakens the heart. Slow failure. Looks natural in a woman my age with trauma. But the blue pills, those are to keep me quiet, to keep me paralyzed so I can't scream while they kill me." I looked at the IV bag. It was a clear saline solution, or so I thought. But now, looking closer, I saw a tiny puncture mark in the injection port at the bottom. Someone had added something to it. I looked at my hands. My hands had crushed the pills. My hands had pushed the plunger. My hands had wiped her brow while I slowly, methodically, followed the instructions to kill her. I felt bile rise in my throat. I turned and ran to the adjoining bathroom. I barely made it to the toilet before I dry heaved. Nothing came up but acid. I knelt on the cold tile, gasping for air. Nolan. "You're doing a great job, babe. You're such an angel. Mother would want you to take care of her." He had turned me into a murder weapon. He had weaponized my compliance, my eagerness to please, my stupidity. He knew I wouldn't question the doctor. He knew I wouldn't pry. He knew I would just follow the schedule. "Audrey!" Cecilia's voice drifted from the bedroom. It sounded weak again. The effort of the outburst was draining her. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and stood up. I looked in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide and dark. I didn't recognize myself. I looked like a victim. I walked back into the bedroom. "We have to get you out of here," I said, my voice shaking but finding a thread of steel. "I'll call an ambulance. I'll call the police." "No!" Cecilia tried to sit up but failed, collapsing back onto the pillows. "Think, girl. If you call the police now, what happens? Dr. Whitmore has signed charts saying I'm unstable. Gavin has the police chief in his pocket. They play golf every Sunday. They'll say I'm delirious from brain damage. They'll say you're incompetent. And by the time the investigation is over, I'll be dead from complications and you'll be in jail for negligence." "Then what do we do?" I asked, tears finally spilling over. "We can't just stay here." "Evidence," Cecilia whispered. "I have proof, physical proof. I hid it before the accident." "Where?" "The bank," she said. "Safety deposit box, but the key, I hid the key." "Where is the key, Cecilia?" She closed her eyes, her face twisting in frustration. I don't remember." "The crash. It scrambled things. I know it's in the house. I know I hid it somewhere safe, somewhere they wouldn't look." "We have to find it," I said. "We have 5 days. They're in Chicago." Cecilia opened her eyes and looked at me with a chilling gravity. "Chicago?" She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Audrey, you naive child, they aren't in Chicago. Gavin's phone was pinging off the router 10 minutes after they left. They're watching. They're waiting. And if we make one wrong move, if they suspect for 1 second that I'm awake, they won't wait for the poison to work." She looked at the ceiling, then back at me. They'll come back and finish the job with a pillow. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands gripped so tightly around the bed sheets that my knuckles turned white. The room felt smaller now, the shadows in the corners stretching out like reaching fingers. $7 million. The number bounced around my skull, refusing to settle. It was an amount of money that didn't feel real to a kindergarten teacher who clipped coupons for laundry detergent. It was abstract until Cecilia described the ledger. She told me about the morning she found the discrepancy. It wasn't a digital notification or a call from the bank. It was a physical ledger, bound in navy blue leather, that Gavin had left on the mahogany desk in the study. She described opening it, expecting to see the usual quarterly dividends and maintenance costs. Instead, she found a bleeding wound in the family finances. She said her finger had traced a line item dated 3 years ago, a transfer of $200,000 to a consulting firm she had never heard of, then another for $500,000, then a wire transfer to an account in the Cayman Islands for over $1 million. I listened to her rasping voice describe the ink on the page. She told me the handwriting next to the approvals wasn't hers, even though it looked like her signature. It was a forgery, practiced and perfect. Gavin had practiced her signature since he was a teenager, she said. He used to sign her name on permission slips and bad report cards. Now he was signing away the family legacy. I felt a wave of nausea. I thought about the time Nolan told me we couldn't afford a honeymoon because his assets were tied up in trust. He had looked so regretful, so responsible. I had rubbed his back and told him it didn't matter, that being together was enough. I was such a fool. While I was heating up frozen dinners to save money, they were siphoning millions into offshore accounts and laughing at me. Cecilia grabbed my arm again, pulling me out of my spiraling thoughts. She told me she had hired a private investigator, a man named Mr. Henderson, to verify the shell companies. He had sent her a dossier. It was thick, heavy with photographs of empty storefronts in Delaware and mailbox drops in strip malls. That was the proof, the real proof. Not just numbers on a page, but the physical reality that the Hawthorne Empire was being gutted from the inside out. I needed to know how it happened. I needed to hear the moment the mask slipped. I asked her about the confrontation. Cecilia looked at the wall, her eyes unfocused, lost in the memory of the library. She described the smell of the room, old paper and lemon polish. She had called them in on a Sunday afternoon, Gavin, Nolan, and Leo. They had walked in wearing their golf clothes, smelling of fresh air and arrogance. She had thrown the dossier on the desk. It landed with a heavy thud. She told me she didn't yell, she didn't scream, she just asked them why. Gavin hadn't denied it. That was the part that made my blood run cold. He hadn't stammered or made excuses. He had picked up the dossier, flipped through it casually, and then smiled. Cecilia said it was a smile of relief, like he was glad he didn't have to pretend anymore. He told her she was confused. He told her that she was getting old, that her memory was failing, that she didn't understand modern finance. It was gaslighting, pure and simple, but delivered with the terrifying confidence of a man who believed his own lies. And Nolan, my husband, the man who held my hand during thunderstorms. Cecilia said he stood by the window, looking out at the garden, refusing to meet her eyes. When she threatened to go to the police, when she reached for the phone, Nolan was the one who stepped forward. He didn't stop her physically. He just said, very quietly, that she should think about the family reputation. He said a scandal would destroy the stock price. He was more worried about the share value than the fact that he was robbing his own mother. Then came the drive. She had stormed out, taking the dossier and the ledger. She was heading to her lawyer's office in the city. She described the feeling of the steering wheel in her hands, the anger vibrating through her body. She was on Route 7, the winding road that hugged the cliffs. She saw the sharp curve coming up. She moved her foot to the brake pedal. She pressed down. Nothing happened. The pedal went to the floor with a sickening lack of resistance. She pumped it again. Nothing. The car was accelerating. Gravity was taking over. She described the trees rushing past, a blur of green and brown. She described the moment she realized she was going to die. She didn't scream. She just thought about how much she hated them. And then the impact. The sound of metal screaming, glass shattering, and then darkness. We didn't have time for grief. The clock on the bedside table read 1:15. We had wasted 20 minutes talking. Every minute we spent reminiscing was a minute the poison in the IV bag was dripping into the trash can instead of her veins, creating a discrepancy we would have to explain later. Cecilia tried to sit up again, her face contorted with effort. We needed the key, the duplicate key she had mentioned earlier. She said it opened a private box at a bank in the next town over, a box that Gavin didn't know existed. Inside were copies of the ledger pages and the investigator's report. It was our smoking gun. I asked her where it was. The house had 40 rooms. It could be anywhere. Cecilia closed her eyes, pressing her fingertips against her temples. She whispered that she had hidden it the night before the confrontation, just in case. She was paranoid, she said, rightfully so, but the memory was slippery. The trauma of the crash, the weeks of sedation, the poison, it had created a fog in her mind. She muttered about the library, maybe inside a hollowed-out book? No, that was too cliché. The greenhouse? Under a loose stone? She shook her head, frustration bringing tears to her eyes. She couldn't remember. She knew it was safe. She knew it was accessible. But the specific location was locked behind a wall of static in her brain. I felt a surge of panic. If we didn't have the key, we didn't have the evidence. If we didn't have the evidence, we couldn't go to the police. We were trapped in a loop. I looked around the room, hoping for a clue, a sign, anything. The antique armoire, the heavy velvet drapes, the Persian rug, it all looked hostile now. Somewhere in this house was the key to our survival, and we were blind. Cecilia grabbed my hand. She told me we had to search. We had to start with the master bedroom, but we couldn't just walk around. The cameras. I had forgotten about the cameras. Paula had said they were everywhere. If I started tearing the house apart, Gavin would see it on his phone. He would know I was looking for something. He would know the game was up. We were paralyzed, not by drugs, but by surveillance. The sound of tires on gravel cut through our panic like a knife. It wasn't the distant hum of traffic from the highway. It was close. It was in the driveway. I ran to the window, staying behind the heavy curtain, and peeked through the crack. A silver sedan was pulling up to the front steps. My heart stopped. It wasn't the black SUV the brothers took. It was a Lexus. Dr. Whitmore. I turned to Cecilia, my voice a strangled whisper. He was here. He wasn't supposed to be here until tomorrow. The schedule said daily visits, but he had just been here this morning. Why was he back? Had Gavin called him? Did they suspect something? Cecilia's eyes went wide. The fear in them was primal. She couldn't be awake. If Whitmore saw her awake, he would call Gavin immediately. The accident would become a very direct, very messy murder right here in the bedroom. She dropped back onto the pillows. She let her jaw go slack. She closed her eyes. It was terrifying how quickly she transformed back into the corpse-like figure I had tended to for weeks. She slowed her breathing, forcing deep, rhythmic inhalations. I scrambled to fix the room, the wash basin, the cloth, the chair I had been sitting in. Everything had to look exactly as it had 10 minutes ago. I grabbed the empty syringe and placed it on the sterile tray. I smoothed my hair. I checked my face in the mirror. I looked terrified, but I could play it off as concern. The doorbell didn't ring. The front door opened. He had a key. I heard his footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, deliberate steps. I stood by the bed, folding my hands in front of me, trying to stop them from shaking. I prayed that Cecilia wouldn't twitch. I prayed that the adrenaline pumping through her veins wouldn't make her heart rate spike on the monitor. The door handle turned. Dr. Whitmore filled the doorway. He was a tall man with silver hair and a tan that looked artificial in the winter light. He wore a pristine white coat over a cashmere sweater. He looked like the kind of doctor who played golf with pharmaceutical reps and signed prescriptions without looking at the patient. He smiled at me. It was a tight, professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. He asked me how everything was going. He apologized for the intrusion, saying he was in the neighborhood and wanted to check on Mrs. Hawthorne's vitals before his rounds at the hospital. I lied. I told him everything was fine. I told him she had been quiet. I told him I had administered the noon medication exactly on time. My voice sounded thin, reedy, but he didn't seem to notice. He walked past me to the bed. He placed his bag on the side table right next to the pill crusher. He pulled out a stethoscope. I watched him lean over Cecilia. He placed the cold metal disc on her chest. I held my breath. Cecilia didn't flinch. Her chest rose and fell in that terrible mechanical rhythm she'd perfected. He listened for a long time. Too long. He frowned slightly. He moved the stethoscope to her neck, listening to the carotid artery. I wondered if he could hear the adrenaline. I wondered if he could hear her screaming inside her own head. He pulled back one of her eyelids. I saw the blue iris, fixed and unseeing. How was she doing that? How was she not reacting to the light? It was a performance of impossible will. He let the eyelid slide shut. He hummed, a low, thoughtful sound that made my skin crawl. He muttered something about her heart rate being slightly elevated. I blamed myself. I told him I had dropped a tray earlier and the noise might have disturbed her. It was a stupid lie, but I needed to explain the spike on the monitor. He looked at me then, really looked at me. His eyes were cold, assessing. He told me that coma patients were very sensitive to their environment. He told me to be more careful. Then he turned his attention to the IV stand. He frowned at the bag. He said the flow rate looked a little slow. He tapped the plastic chamber. Then he reached into his bag. He pulled out a new IV bag. The liquid inside was clear, innocent looking, but the label had a red stripe across the top. He said he wanted to switch her to a new electrolyte compound. He said her skin turgor suggested dehydration. He said this new formula would help with tissue elasticity. It was all medical jargon designed to confuse me, to make me nod and agree. But I knew what was in that bag. It was the accelerator. He handed me the bag. He actually handed it to me. He asked me to hold it while he prepped the line. The plastic was cool and heavy in my hands. I was holding a weapon. I was holding the thing that was going to stop Cecilia's heart. I wanted to drop it. I wanted to throw it at him and scream that I knew everything. I wanted to run out the door. But the camera in the hallway was watching. If I panicked, if I refused, Gavin would know. So I held it, my fingers numb against the cold plastic. I watched Dr. Whitmore clamp the tube of the old bag. He moved with efficient, practiced motions. He disconnected the line. A single drop of liquid fell onto the Persian rug. He took the bag from me and hung it on the stand. He spiked it, driving the plastic nozzle into the port with a sharp twist. He unclamped the line. I watched the liquid begin to drip. Drip, drip, drip. He told me to watch the flow rate. He told me to make sure it stayed steady. He put a hand on my shoulder, squeezing it gently. He told me I was doing a brave thing. He said Cecilia was lucky to have me. The irony tasted like ash in my mouth. He was praising me for being a good accomplice. He packed his bag. He snapped the leather latch shut. He looked at Cecilia one last time, and for a second, I saw a flicker of something else in his face. Not concern, impatience. He checked his watch. He was on a schedule. Death was on a schedule. He walked to the door. He told me to call him if her breathing changed. He said it casually, as if he expected it to happen, as if he was waiting for the call that said she was gone. I nodded. I couldn't speak. I followed him to the stairs, watching him descend. I waited until I heard the front door open and close. I waited until I heard the Lexus engine start. I waited until the sound faded down the driveway. Then I ran back into the room. "He's gone," I hissed. Cecilia's eyes flew open. She gasped, sucking in air as if she had been drowning. "Get it out!" she screamed, her voice breaking. "Get it out of me!" I lunged for the IV stand. I didn't know how to do this properly. I didn't care about sterile procedure. I clamped the line. My hands were shaking so badly I fumbled the plastic wheel. I finally jammed it shut. I looked at the needle taped to her arm. I had to pull it out. But if I pulled it out, there would be a mark. And when he came back, or if he checked the bag levels... "We can't take it out," I said, panic making my voice shrill. "He'll know. He'll see the puncture wound. He'll see the bag is full." "I don't care," Cecilia cried, trying to claw at the tape with her weak hand. "It's poison, Audrey. It's burning." "Stop," I grabbed her hand. "We have to fake it. We have to make it look like it's flowing." I looked around the room frantically. The mattress. "The mattress," I said. "We'll run the line into the mattress, under the sheets. It'll soak into the padding. The bag will empty, but it won't go into you." It was messy. It was desperate. But it was the only way to keep the illusion alive. I grabbed a pair of scissors from the medical tray. I cut the tape holding the needle. I carefully, slowly pulled the needle out of her vein. Blood welled up, a dark red drop against her pale skin. I pressed a cotton ball to it. "Hold this," I commanded. Cecilia pressed the cotton to her arm. I took the IV line, the needle still dripping that clear, deadly liquid. I shoved it between the mattress and the box spring, pushing it deep into the fabric. The liquid would soak into the expensive orthopedic foam. We watched the drip chamber. Drip, drip, drip. It was flowing. Into the bed, not her body. We collapsed back, both of us breathing hard in the silence of the room. We had survived the visit, but the bag was huge. It would take hours to empty, and we still didn't have the key. The room smelled faintly of bitter almonds and rubbing alcohol. We stared at the damp spot spreading across the side of the mattress, a dark stain on the pristine white fabric. The poison was soaking into the expensive memory foam, pooling in the fibers instead of Cecilia's veins. I felt a surge of irrational guilt, worried about ruining the bedding while we were literally fighting for our lives. That was what this house did to you. It made you care about the furniture while the people inside it rotted. I grabbed a stack of towels from the bathroom and jammed them between the mattress and the frame to catch the runoff. My hands were sticky with the fluid. I scrubbed them in the bathroom sink, using water that was too hot, scrubbing until my skin turned red. I needed to wash the feeling of complicity off me. Every time I had pushed that plunger over the last 3 weeks, I had been an executioner. The realization made me want to scream, but I couldn't. I walked back into the bedroom. Cecilia was lying perfectly still, her eyes closed, practicing her coma. She was getting better at it, or maybe the exhaustion was just taking over. I checked the window again. The driveway was empty. Dr. Whitmore was gone. But the silence he left behind felt heavy, pregnant with the threat of his return. I needed to get the towels out of the room. I needed to hide the evidence of our sabotage. I bundled the wet, chemical-soaked terry cloth into a ball and shoved it into the bottom of the laundry hamper, burying it under Cecilia's unused nightgowns. That was when I heard it. A car engine. Not the smooth purr of Dr. Whitmore's Lexus, but a rougher, older sound. A belt squealed as the engine cut off. I froze. Another visitor. We weren't supposed to have visitors. We were supposed to be in mourning, in isolation. I crept to the window and peered through the sliver of space between the curtains. A dark sedan sat in the driveway. It looked like a bruised plum against the gray stone of the house. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was wearing a trench coat belted tightly at the waist, and she was looking up at the house with an expression that looked like pure terror. It was Paula, the nurse who had quit 5 days ago without notice. I didn't wait. I couldn't let her ring the doorbell. I couldn't let her stand on the porch where the neighbors might see her. I ran down the stairs, my flat slapping against the marble. I threw open the front door just as she raised her hand to knock. Paula jumped back, clutching her purse to her chest like a shield. Her face was gray, her eyes darting past me into the dark foyer. She looked older than she had a week ago. The lines around her mouth were deeper, etched by stress. I asked her what she was doing here. My voice was breathless, frantic. I told her she shouldn't be here. She didn't answer immediately. She looked over her shoulder at the empty driveway, then back at me. She refused to cross the threshold. She stood on the doormat, shivering in the cold wind. She whispered that she had to tell me something. She said she couldn't sleep. She said she had been driving past the driveway for an hour, trying to work up the courage to stop. I tried to pull her inside, out of the wind, but she planted her feet. She shook her head violently. She said she wouldn't come in. She said she just needed to say it and leave. I looked at her wild eyes and realized she wasn't just nervous. She was hunted. I stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door almost shut behind me. The cold air bit through my sweater. I asked her why she left. I asked her why she abandoned me with a dying woman. I needed to know if she was part of it. Was she another one of Gavin's pawns, or was she a victim like me? Paula looked at me and her lip trembled. She told me she didn't want to leave. She told me she loved nursing. She told me she needed the money. But then she told me about the phone call. She didn't recite the call verbatim. She just described the voice. It was Gavin. He had called her personal cell phone at 9 o'clock at night. He hadn't introduced himself. He just started talking about her daughter. Paula's hands were shaking so hard she dropped her keys. I bent to pick them up, and when our fingers brushed, her skin was ice cold. She told me Gavin knew her daughter's schedule. He knew she took the bus to soccer practice on Tuesdays. He knew she waited alone at the corner of Elm and Main. He had said it so politely. That was what haunted her. He hadn't screamed threats. He had just mused about how dangerous the city was becoming. He had said it would be a tragedy if a young girl with such a bright future had an accident. He said accidents happen so easily when people aren't paying attention. I felt the blood drain from my face. Gavin. The man who bought me a bread maker for Christmas. The man who always remembered my birthday. He was threatening a child to cover his tracks. Paula grabbed my arm. Her grip was desperate. She told me that Dr. Whitmore wasn't a real doctor anymore. She had looked him up. His license was probationary. He had lost his practice 2 years ago after a malpractice suit involving painkillers. Gavin had found him, dusted him off, and bought him. She told me that the medication list didn't make sense. She said she had tried to tell me before she left, but she was too scared. The dosages were wrong. The combinations were dangerous. She said she had flushed the pills down the toilet whenever she could, but she couldn't stop him from hanging the IV bags. She started crying then, silent tears that tracked through her makeup. She apologized. She said she was sorry she was a coward. She said she had to choose her daughter over Cecilia. I wanted to comfort her. I wanted to tell her I understood. But then she looked up at the transom window above the front door, and her expression shifted from sadness to absolute horror. She leaned in close, her breath smelling of peppermint and fear. She asked me if I knew about the upgrades. I stared at her blankly. Upgrades? She pointed a shaking finger, not at the window, but past it, toward the ceiling of the foyer. She told me to look at the smoke detector, the one with the blinking red light. I looked. It was a standard white disc, innocuous, boring. I had walked under it 1,000 times. She told me it wasn't a smoke detector. She explained that she had seen the installation crew. They weren't from the alarm company. They were guys in unmarked vans. She had seen the boxes in the garage, high-definition, wide-angle lenses disguised as household fixtures, motion-activated, Wi-Fi enabled. She told me there was one in the kitchen, inside the motion sensor for the alarm. There was one in the library, hidden in the spine of a fake book. There was one in the hallway watching the stairs. And the worst part, she told me where the feed went. She had seen Gavin checking it on his tablet. He had laughed at something I did. Maybe I tripped. Maybe I was singing to myself while I cooked. He was watching me like I was a rat in a maze. He wasn't just checking on his mother, he was monitoring his investment. He was watching me slowly kill her, recording every moment so he would have the perfect evidence to frame me when she finally died. I felt violated. I felt naked. The house suddenly felt like it was closing in on me. Every corner, every shadow, every blinking light was an eye. Paula didn't stay. She shoved the keys back into her pocket and ran to her car. She reversed out of the driveway so fast she clipped the azalea bush. I watched her go, feeling a terrible envy. She was escaping. I was still inside. I turned back to the door. I had to go back in. I had to walk through that foyer, under that fake smoke detector, knowing that somewhere, maybe just a few miles away, Gavin was watching a screen. I opened the door and stepped inside. I forced myself to walk normally. Don't look up. Don't look guilty. I walked to the kitchen. I poured a glass of water. My hand wanted to shake, but I locked my elbow against my side. I took a sip. I smiled at the empty room. It was a grotesque, frozen smile. I'm just a happy wife, I thought loud enough for my own brain to hear. I'm just taking care of things. I walked to the stairs. The camera in the hallway was watching my back. I could feel it burning a hole between my shoulder blades. I walked up slowly, casually. When I got to the bedroom, I closed the door and leaned against it, sliding down until I hit the floor. The bedroom. Paula hadn't mentioned a camera in the bedroom. It was the only place that might be safe, or maybe she just hadn't seen it. Cecilia hissed at me from the bed. She asked who it was. I crawled across the floor, staying below the level of the dresser just in case. I pulled myself up beside her ear. I cupped my hand over my mouth so no lip reader could decipher the words. I whispered everything. Paula, the threats, the cameras. Cecilia went rigid. She understood immediately. We weren't just prisoners. We were actors on a stage. And if we broke character, the curtain would fall. We sat in silence for a long time. The clock ticked. 2:30 in the afternoon. We needed the key, but we couldn't search. We couldn't leave the room and start tearing apart the library or the greenhouse because Gavin would see. Then I remembered. The study. 2 days ago, before everything went wrong, I had been in the study looking for a stamp. I had opened the bottom drawer of Gavin's desk, the one that was usually locked. It had been stuck, slightly ajar. Inside, tucked under a stack of manila envelopes, I had seen a blue folder. It was thick. It looked official. At the time, I hadn't thought anything of it. But now? Now my mind raced. Blue folder. Blue leather ledger. Cecilia had said the ledger was blue. Maybe he hadn't destroyed it. Maybe he was arrogant enough to keep it. Or maybe he needed it for the transfer. I told Cecilia. I whispered it into her ear. I told her I thought I knew where the evidence was. She looked skeptical. She asked why he would leave it there. I told her it was a mistake, a slip-up. People make mistakes. I had to get it. But I couldn't just walk into the study and steal a file. That would look suspicious. I needed a reason. I needed a prop. I stood up. I smoothed my sweater. I grabbed the laundry basket from the corner, the one containing the poison-soaked towels buried at the bottom. I'm going to do some laundry, I said loudly, my voice cracking slightly. I cleared my throat and said it again, aiming for the ceiling. Just going to run a load of laundry. It was a flimsy excuse to go downstairs, but it was all I had. I picked up the basket. It was heavy. I opened the bedroom door and stepped out onto the stage. I walked down the hall, humming a tune I couldn't name. I walked past the camera. I went down the stairs. I turned left toward the laundry room, but then I stopped. I pretended to remember something. I snapped my fingers, a cheesy, theatrical gesture. I turned around and walked toward the study. Just looking for a pen, I told the invisible audience. Just need to find a pen. I entered the study. The camera Paula mentioned was in the bookshelf. I kept my back to it. I walked to the desk. I opened the top drawer, rummaging for a pen. I found one. I put it in my pocket. Then, shielding the action with my body, I reached down. I pulled on the bottom drawer. It stuck. I pulled harder. It slid open. The blue folder was there. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I grabbed it. I didn't look inside. I couldn't risk reading it here. I slid it under my sweater, tucking it into the waistband of my jeans, then pulled the laundry basket up tight against my stomach to hide the bulge. I closed the drawer. I turned around, clutching the basket. I walked out of the study. I walked to the laundry room, threw the towels into the washer, and started it. Then I walked back upstairs, carrying the empty basket and the folder that burned against my skin. I had it. I had the proof. We were going to win. I closed the bedroom door behind me and leaned against it, my chest heaving as if I had just run a marathon. The laundry basket was empty, the towels churning in the washer downstairs, but under my sweater, the blue folder burned against my skin like a brand. I pulled it out, my hands trembling so violently that I almost dropped it. I held it up to Cecilia like a trophy. I wanted her to smile. I wanted her to tell me that I had done it, that I had saved us. I needed that validation because my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs that felt dangerously like a panic attack. Cecilia sat up, her eyes locking onto the blue leather. For a second, relief washed over her face, softening the harsh lines of pain and exhaustion. She reached out, her fingers snatching the folder with a desperation that mirrored my own. She placed it on her lap and flipped it open. I waited for the revelation. I waited for her to point at a page and say, "This is it. This is the proof." Instead, she went rigid. She stared at the first page. Then she flipped to the second, then the third. Her movements were jerky, angry. She didn't read the text. She scanned the layout, the headers, the footers. Then she slammed the folder shut and shoved it away from her as if it were contaminated. "It is a decoy," she whispered, the hope draining out of her face to be replaced by a terrifying shade of gray. I felt the room tilt. "What do you mean?" I asked. "It was in his locked drawer. It was hidden." "It is a canary trap," she hissed. "Look at the date on the header. It says January. The audit I commissioned was in October. And look at the margins. The text is aligned to the right, not the left. Gavin knows I am obsessive about formatting. He knows I would never accept a document that looked like this." She looked up at me and her eyes were filled with fear. "He planted it. He knew I might go looking, or that I might send someone. He left it there to see if it would be moved." I felt the blood drain from my face, but I put everything back, I stammered. I closed the drawer exactly how I found it. "Did you check the hair?" she asked. "The hair?" "Gavin places a single strand of hair across the seal of his private files," she said, her voice trembling. "It is an old trick he learned from a spy novel he read when he was 12. He thinks he is some kind of genius. If you open the folder, the hair is gone. And when he comes back, when he checks—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I had walked right into a trap. I had thought I was being clever, playing the role of the oblivious housewife, but I had just signaled to Gavin that someone was hunting for his secrets. We sat there in the silence, the blue folder lying on the bedspread between us like an unexploded bomb. We had risked everything for a stack of useless paper, and now we were even more vulnerable than before. I couldn't look at the folder anymore. I walked to the window, needing to look away, needing to see something real, something outside of this suffocating room. I peered through the crack in the curtains again, staring out at the gray afternoon. The wind was picking up, stripping the last dead leaves from the oak trees lining the driveway. The sky was the color of a bruise. I scanned the road looking for any sign of Dr. Whitmore or the police or anyone who could help us. That was when I saw the glint of chrome. It was far down the road, parked on the shoulder, partially obscured by the thick trunk of an old maple tree. A car. A black car. I squinted. It was too far to read the license plate, but I knew that silhouette. It was long, sleek, and aggressive, a Mercedes S-Class, Gavin's car. I felt a scream build in my throat, a physical lump that I had to swallow back down. I turned to Cecilia. "They never went to Chicago," I whispered. She looked at me, defeat etched into every wrinkle of her face. "I told you," she said softly. "He is right there," I said, pointing a shaking finger at the window. "He is parked down the street. He is just sitting there." "Watching," Cecilia said. "He is waiting for the call from Whitmore. Or he is watching the camera feed, or he is just enjoying the control." The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The distance I thought we had, the 5 days of safety, was a lie. They weren't hundreds of miles away in a conference room. They were 500 yards away, sitting in heated leather seats, probably drinking coffee and checking their watches, waiting for their mother to die. I backed away from the window, terrified that he could see me, even though I knew it was impossible from that distance. The house felt smaller suddenly. The walls felt like they were closing in. We were rats in a cage, and the cat was sitting right outside the door, licking its paws. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. I jumped, gasping for air. I pulled it out, my hands slick with sweat. A text message from Nolan. I stared at his name on the screen. My husband. The man who had promised to love and cherish me. The man who was currently sitting in a car down the street waiting for me to become a widow so he could become a millionaire. I opened the message. "Hey babe, just landed in Chicago. The weather is awful here, missing you already. How is Mom doing?" Whitmore said he changed her protocol to something more aggressive. "Hope you are keeping up with it. We want her to have the best chance possible. Send a pic of the chart when you can, just so we can keep the records straight for the insurance. Love you." I read it twice. The tone was sickeningly sweet. It was that weaponized kindness, that toxic positivity that made you feel crazy for suspecting anything. He wasn't asking if I had killed her yet. He was asking if I was keeping the records straight for insurance. He was framing his greed as responsibility, but the demand was clear. Send a pic of the chart. He wanted proof. He wanted to see that I had administered the new IV bag. He wanted to see my initials next to the lethal dose. I looked at the chart hanging at the foot of the bed. It was blank for the afternoon slot. "If I don't send it, he will know," I said, my voice sounding hollow. "If I do send it—" "If you send it, you are documenting a murder," Cecilia said. She was sitting up again, her mind working through the fog of pain. "But you have to. If you don't, he will come inside to check." I grabbed the clipboard. I uncapped the pen attached to it. My hand hovered over the paper. I had to write the time, 2 o'clock. I had to write the dosage, 500 milliliters. I had to write the medication name, the code Dr. Whitmore had used. I wrote it. The ink looked black and permanent against the white paper. I signed my initials. A.H. Audrey Hawthorne. I was signing a confession. I took a picture with my phone. I made sure the lighting was good. I made sure my handwriting was legible. I felt sick. I felt like I was detaching from my own body, watching a stranger perform these actions. I typed a reply. "Just did it. She is resting peacefully. Dr. Whitmore is so thorough. Miss you, too." I hit send. I watched the progress bar. Sending. Sent. I held my breath. 1 second, 2 seconds, 10 seconds. My phone buzzed again. "Thanks, Angel. You are doing such a great job. We are so lucky to have you." He bought it. Or at least he was pretending to buy it. I dropped the phone onto the bed as if it were burning hot. He called me an angel. He was calling me an angel while he waited for me to finish the job. We had bought ourselves a few hours. Maybe. But we still didn't have the key. And we couldn't stay in the bedroom forever. If I stayed up here all day, Gavin would wonder why I wasn't eating, why I wasn't cleaning, why I wasn't living my life. "I have to go downstairs," I said, wiping my sweaty palms on my jeans. "I have to put on a show." Cecilia nodded. She understood the grim logic. You go down, be visible, be normal. While you are distracting them, I will look for the key. "You can't," I argued. "You can barely stand." "I have to," she said simply. "It is in this room." "I know it is. I just need to find it." I helped her sit on the edge of the bed. She swayed, dizzy, but her jaw was set in a line of granite determination. I fixed the pillows to look like someone was sleeping under the duvet. Then I smoothed my hair, pinched my cheeks to bring some color back into my pale face, and walked out the door. This was my stage debut. I walked down the stairs, making sure my steps were light and bouncy. I walked into the kitchen, right into the field of view of the motion sensor. I opened the fridge. I took out vegetables. I took out a chicken breast. I was going to cook a 3-course meal for one person. I turned on the radio. Pop music filled the kitchen, cheerful and mindless. I started chopping carrots. Chop, chop, chop. I forced myself to sway to the music. I hummed along. I pretended to taste the sauce and nodded approvingly at the empty room. I was performing for an audience of one. I imagined Gavin zooming in on his tablet, looking for stress lines around my eyes, looking for tremors in my hands. I held the knife with a death grip to keep it steady. I am a happy wife, I thought. I am cooking dinner. I am waiting for my husband. I am not terrified. I sautéed the onions. The smell of garlic and butter filled the air, masking the smell of fear that I was sure was radiating off me. I checked the oven. I wiped the counter. I moved constantly, keeping the motion sensor engaged, keeping the red light blinking. Look at me, Gavin. Look at how stupid and domestic I am. Look at how well I follow orders. While I chopped and stirred, my mind was upstairs. I imagined Cecilia sliding off the bed, her knees hitting the rug. I imagined her dragging herself across the floor, inch by painful inch. She was weak. Her muscles had atrophied. Every movement must have felt like lifting a boulder. I imagined her opening the drawers I had already checked, the jewelry box, the nightstand, the pockets of her coats in the closet. I dropped a spoon in the sink. It clattered loudly. I flinched, then forced a laugh, a fake, bright laugh. "Silly me," I telegraphed to the camera. "Clumsy Audrey." But my heart was pounding. What if she fell? What if she crashed into a lamp? The sound would carry. The camera in the hallway might pick it up. Gavin might hear a thud and wonder why his comatose mother was moving furniture. I turned the radio up louder. I started singing along to the chorus. I sang loudly, badly, trying to create a wall of sound to cover any noise from upstairs. I checked the clock on the microwave. 5:30. I had been down here for an hour. How long could she search? How long before her strength gave out? I imagined her frustration. The key was a needle in a haystack, and she was searching with hands that wouldn't cooperate, and a brain that was full of holes. I stirred the sauce until it was a thick, unappetizing sludge. I wasn't going to eat it. I couldn't eat. My stomach was a knot of acid, but I had to plate it. I had to sit at the table and pretend to enjoy it. I was buying time with meaningless actions. And every second that ticked by was a second closer to the moment the poison was supposed to finish her off. I sat at the kitchen table. The solitary plate of chicken and vegetables sat before me, steam rising in the cold air. The camera in the corner blinked. Red, dark, red, dark. I picked up my fork. I stabbed a carrot. I lifted it to my mouth. My hand wouldn't move. I stared at the fork. It was vibrating. The vibration traveled up my arm, into my shoulder, into my neck. I couldn't stop it. The facade was cracking. The sheer absurdity of the situation, eating dinner while my mother-in-law crawled on the floor upstairs and my husband watched from a car down the street, hit me like a tidal wave. I dropped the fork. It hit the plate with a sharp clack. Tears welled up in my eyes, hot, stinging tears. I couldn't stop them. Panic seized me. If I cried, he would know. Happy wives don't cry over roast chicken. If I broke down now, he would think I had found something out or that I was cracking under the pressure of the mercy killing. I had to fix it. I had to spin it. I buried my face in my hands, shoulders shaking. I let myself sob for exactly 10 seconds. Then I looked up at the ceiling, right at the smoke detector, and I spoke. "I miss you so much, Nolan," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I hate being alone here. It is so hard watching her fade away." I wiped my eyes with a napkin. I sniffed loudly. I picked up my wine glass and took a huge gulp. I wasn't crying because I was terrified. I was crying because I was a devoted, overwhelmed wife, missing her husband. That was the narrative. That was the lie. I forced a watery smile. I whispered, "You can do this, Audrey," loud enough for the microphone to pick up. I picked up the fork again. I forced the carrot into my mouth. I chewed. It tasted like sawdust. I swallowed. I had pulled it back from the brink. But I knew I couldn't keep this up much longer. I was fraying at the edges. One more surprise, one more twist, and I would shatter completely. I walked back up the stairs, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. The house was quiet, that heavy, oppressive silence that comes before a storm. I pushed open the bedroom door, terrified of what I would find. I expected to see Cecilia collapsed on the floor, her heart finally given out from the strain. Instead, she was leaning against the headboard of the bed, her face gray and slick with sweat, but her eyes were burning with a manic energy. She had torn the room apart. The drawers were open, clothes scattered across the rug like the aftermath of a hurricane, but her hands were empty. I sank to the floor beside the bed. "You didn't find it," I whispered, the hope draining out of me like water from a cracked cup. "No," she rasped. "I checked everywhere. The vents, the floorboards, the lining of my jewelry box. It is gone, Audrey. My mind is broken. I can't remember." She hit the mahogany headboard with her weak fist, a dull thud of frustration. "Wait," I said, staring at where her hand had struck. The headboard. It was an antique, a massive carved monstrosity from the 19th century that she had refused to replace. I remembered something Nolan had told me once, laughing about how his mother loved her secrets. He said the old furniture was full of tricks. "Cecilia," I said, scrambling up. "The bed. You didn't hide it in the room. You hid it in the bed." Her eyes widened. She turned, running her fingers along the intricate scrolling of the wood. She pressed on a rosette carved into the center pillar. Nothing happened. She pressed on the ivy leaf next to it. Nothing. Then she pressed the eye of the carved lion on the right post. There was a sharp click. A small section of the wood, no bigger than a deck of cards, popped open. I gasped. I reached in, my fingers brushing against velvet lining. I felt cold metal. I pulled it out. It was a key, a small silver key with a tag attached to it. The tag was yellowed and old. I squinted at the faded ink, box 347. We stared at it. It was the smallest thing in the room, but it weighed more than the house. It was our lives. It was our freedom. "We have it," I breathed. "We actually have it." "Now we just have to survive the night," Cecilia whispered. The night stretched out like a rubber band about to snap. We didn't sleep. We couldn't. I sat in the chair by the window, watching the darkness outside, while Cecilia lay in the bed, clutching the key in her hand under the sheets. The IV bag was empty. The mattress was sodden with the clear liquid. I had turned the drip rate down to the bare minimum to make it last, but physics had won. We were dry. Then, the power flickered. It was just for a second. The storm outside had finally arrived, bringing wind that lashed against the windows. The lights dipped, brown out low, then surged back to full brightness. The silence was shattered. Beep! The heart monitor reset. The ventilator backup alarm triggered. The room was filled with a piercing electronic shriek. "Oh my God," I hissed, lunging for the machine. Cecilia sat up, terrified. The sound was deafening in the quiet house. "Shut it off," she cried. I fumbled with the buttons. My hands were shaking. I didn't know the code to silence the alarm. It just kept screaming. Beep, beep, beep. The audio feed, the cameras, the microphones in the hallway. If Gavin was listening, he would hear this. He would hear the sudden spike in activity. He would hear us talking. I found the power cord at the back of the machine and yanked it out of the wall. The silence slammed back into the room, ringing in my ears. We froze. We waited. Had he heard? Was he already running up the driveway? I army crawled to the window. The Mercedes was still there, dark and silent under the swaying trees. No movement, no lights. He must have turned the audio down, Cecilia whispered, or the storm is interfering with the signal. We got lucky, I said, my voice trembling, but we can't turn the machines back on. If we do, they will alarm again until they recalibrate. So we sit in the dark, Cecilia said, and we pray he doesn't check the vitals feed until morning. The sun came up gray and reluctant. I felt like I had aged 10 years in 10 hours. I washed my face with cold water, trying to scrub away the terror. I put on my coat. I put the key in my bra, right against my skin. I wasn't trusting it to a pocket or a purse. At 8 o'clock, the front door opened. Dr. Whitmore. I met him on the landing. I forced a smile that felt like a grimace. "Good morning, doctor," I said. He looked at me, his eyes puffy. He looked like he hadn't slept either. He walked past me into the room. He looked at the monitor. It was dark. "Power surge last night." I lied quickly. "It blew the fuse on the strip. I didn't want to wake you." She seemed peaceful. He grunted, accepting the lie because he didn't care enough to investigate. He checked Cecilia's pulse manually. He lifted her eyelid. "She is declining," he said, his voice void of emotion. "Her pulse is thready. The new protocol is working." I felt a surge of rage so hot it almost blinded me. He was talking about killing her like he was discussing a leaky pipe. "I need to run to the pharmacy," I said, "and the grocery store. We are out of milk and personal items." I gestured vaguely to my stomach. It was the universal code for female problems, the one thing that made men like Whitmore stop asking questions. He checked his watch. "Make it quick," he said. "I want to increase the dosage at noon. I want you here for that." I nodded. "I will be back by 11. I walked out of the room. I didn't say goodbye to Cecilia. I couldn't. If I looked at her, I would break. I walked down the stairs. I walked past the camera in the hall. I walked out the front door. The air outside was crisp and cold. I walked to my car, a sensible sedan that looked tiny next to the massive house. I got in. I locked the doors. I started the engine. I looked in the rearview mirror. The Mercedes down the street turned its lights on. It was immediate. He wasn't even hiding it anymore. He knew. He knew I was leaving, and he was going to make sure I didn't go anywhere he didn't want me to go. I put the car in reverse. I backed out. I drove down the long driveway, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against the key hidden in my chest. I reached the end of the driveway and turned right toward the town, toward the bank. The Mercedes pulled out. It accelerated. It was closing the distance fast. Then, from a side road, another car appeared, a black SUV. It pulled in behind the Mercedes. Nolan. They were all here, the whole family gathering for the kill. My phone rang. The Bluetooth system announced the caller, "Hubby." I stared at the screen. I didn't answer. It rang again and again. I pressed the gas pedal. My little car whined in protest, but it sped up. 50, 60. The trees blurred. I answered the phone. "Hey, Angel." Nolan's voice filled the car. It sounded distorted, metallic. "Where are you going?" "To the store," I said, my voice shaking. I told Dr. Whitmore. "Turn around, Audrey," he said. His voice dropped the toxic sweetness. It was just cold now. "Turn around and come home. We need to talk about the blue folder." He knew. I hung up. I floored it. I was doing 80 miles per hour on a winding country road. The Mercedes was right on my bumper. I could see Gavin's face in the mirror. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked furious. They were trying to box me in. The Mercedes swerved to the left, trying to pull alongside me. The SUV was close behind, cutting off my retreat. I swerved to the center line, blocking Gavin. He honked, a long, angry blast. We were coming up on the town line. The bank was on Main Street. But to get there, I had to go through the intersection at the bottom of the hill. I saw the light. It was red. I didn't care. I blew through it. Gavin followed. A pickup truck slammed on its brakes, horn blaring, missing the Mercedes by inches. I checked the mirror. Nolan was falling back, but Gavin was relentless. He bumped my rear bumper. The car jolted. I screamed. I fought the steering wheel to keep from spinning out. He hit me again. Harder. He was trying to run me off the road. He didn't care about a scandal anymore. He just wanted to stop me. I saw the bank ahead. It was on the right, but there was a delivery truck double parked in front of it. I couldn't stop. If I slowed down to squeeze in, Gavin would ram me into the truck. I would be trapped. I couldn't get to the bank. I looked frantically for an option. The road split ahead. Left went to the highway. Right went to the municipal center, the police station. It was my only chance. But Gavin was on my right side now, forcing me toward the highway, toward the open road where he could run me into a ditch without witnesses. I looked at his shiny black car. I looked at his angry face. I made a choice. I didn't turn away from him. I turned into him. I yanked the steering wheel to the right. My car slammed into the side of the Mercedes. Metal screamed. Glass shattered. The impact threw me against the door, knocking the wind out of me. Gavin wasn't expecting it. He lost control. His car spun out, tires screeching, sliding across the center line and crashing into a telephone pole. I didn't stop to look. My car was limping, the front right tire grinding against the fender, but it was still moving. I dragged it around the corner. The police station was there, a brick building with a flag out front. It looked like heaven. I pulled into the lot, jumping the curb. I slammed the car into park. I threw the door open and ran. I ran like I was on fire. I burst through the double doors of the station. "Help me!" I screamed. My voice was raw, animalistic. "Someone is trying to kill me." The lobby went silent. A desk sergeant looked up, his coffee cup freezing halfway to his mouth. I knew him. Officer Miller. I had seen him at the club with Gavin. They smoked cigars together. He stood up slowly. "Mrs. Hawthorne?" he said. He reached for the phone on his desk. He didn't reach for his radio. He reached for the landline. I stopped. I knew that look. He was calling Gavin. "No," I whispered, backing away. Officer Miller smiled, a tight, reassuring smile that made my blood run cold. "You look upset, Audrey. Why don't you come sit down? I will call your husband to come get you." "I'm not upset," I yelled. "I have evidence." Attempted murder. Fraud. He picked up the receiver. Then a door opened behind him. A woman stepped out. She wore a detective's badge on her belt and looked like she hadn't slept in a week. She looked at me, then at Officer Miller, then at the phone in his hand. "Put the phone down, Miller," she said. Her voice was sharp, authoritative. He hesitated. "She is hysterical, Detective. Just a domestic dispute." I pulled the key out of my bra. I held it up. My hand was shaking, but the silver caught the fluorescent light. "Box 347, I gasped. "First National Bank, the ledger, the forgery, the poison. It is all there." The detective walked around the desk. She stood between me and Officer Miller. She looked me in the eye. "I am Detective Morales," she said. I collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. Update. 3 months later, the ocean breeze rattled the wind chimes on the back porch of the cottage. It was a small house, nothing like the Hawthorne estate. The paint was peeling slightly, and the kitchen was the size of a closet, but it was ours. I poured 2 cups of tea and walked out to the deck. Cecilia was sitting in the wicker chair, a blanket draped over her legs. She looked different. Her hair was white now, no longer dyed that severe brunette. She looked softer, but her eyes were still sharp. I handed her the tea. "Did you hear?" she asked, blowing on the steam. I sat down beside her. "The verdict?" She nodded. "Gavin got 20 years, I said. Federal prison. No golf courses, no cigars. Nolan got 15. Leo took a plea deal, testified against them. He got 5. "And Whitmore?" she asked. 30, I said. For the malpractice, the attempted murder, the drugs. Cecilia took a sip of tea. She looked out at the water. "Good," she said simply. "We didn't talk about them often. We tried to fill our days with boring, normal things. I was teaching again at a new school in the village. Cecilia had taken up watercolors. She painted storms mostly. Dark, swirling clouds with tiny slivers of light breaking through. She reached out and took my hand. Her grip was strong now. The tremor was gone. "Thank you," she said. I squeezed her hand back. "We saved each other, Cecilia." She smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached her eyes. I still had nightmares. Sometimes I woke up sweating, hearing the beep of the heart monitor or seeing the headlights of the Mercedes in my rearview mirror. But then I would hear Cecilia snoring softly in the guest room, and I would know it was over. We had lost the money. The lawyers took most of it, and the rest went to pay back the trust. We were broke. We were damaged, but we were free. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.